As we head into Election Day, we want to show disturbing new evidence of overseas efforts to mess with our democracy. The FBI says 2 phony videos online claim to be from the FBI, but they are not. One is about election security. The other is about Vice President Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff. U.S. officials think the videos come from a disinformation campaign backed by Russia. Let's talk about this with David Becker, Executive Director of the Center of Election Innovation and Research, and Chris Kerbs, former Director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They are CBS News contributors. Good morning, fellas. How you guys doing?
I'm doing great.
All right, Chris. So we now have 4 videos that have been flagged by government officials as misinformation. How does this compare to what we saw in 2016 and in 2020?
Yeah, so in 2016, the Russians were much more engaged on platform with fake personas, with accounts, where they were directly sending messages out to the American people. What they're doing now is creating content, these videos, that aren't particularly good, right? They're somewhat amateurish. That's not to say they can't be more advanced, more impressive down the road, but for now, they're fairly amateurish. And then they're putting them onto platforms like Telegram and X, and then they're laundering them through the American people, where American voters are picking these videos up and then sharing them and amplifying them online. So they've evolved their tactics, they're getting a wider reach, but they're also attacking the seams in content moderation as those policies have shifted in the post-2020 election era.
Now, David, you say, despite the spread of misinformation, that our election infrastructure is actually very safe. What can you say to reassure voters? Because you hear what Chris just said, and I'm thinking, as a voter, if you don't do your own due diligence, you're believing this stuff.
Yeah, well, we can look at what's happened so far. We have nearly 80 million people who've already voted so far. And that's over half the turnout that we saw in 2020, which was record turnout. What we've seen is very few problems. If you actually look about it around across the nation, almost all of the voting has gone smoothly, it's gone safely, it's gone securely. We haven't even heard much about lines, remarkably. It's really fantastic work election officials have been doing around the country. Everyone around the country should understand our voter lists are more accurate than they've ever been before. We have better technology around them. We have paper ballots throughout the country. 97% of all people in the country vote on paper ballots, which are auditable, recountable. Right. And if the machines malfunction in some way, it would be caught because we go back and look at the paper to compare hand counts of the paper to the machine count to make sure they're accurate. Every single battleground state will be voting on paper ballots.
You also say there's no such thing as a perfect election.
Right. Yeah.
Which makes people go,
Well, we have to understand. We've got an election in nearly 10,000 jurisdictions, hundreds of thousands of election workers, millions of volunteers, and 160 million Americans. It would be weird if everything went exactly perfectly. We're going to see polling places open late. We're going to see traffic problems. We're going to see some technology problems. Expect that. Don't allow those normal kind of problems that we see in every election to be leveraged to make you believe there's some kind of massive conspiracy that no one is talking about.
So, Chris, you're the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, better known as CISA.
That's right.
We've had your forerunner here, Jen Easterly. What will CISA be doing on Election Day? What's the mission, and how are they going to accomplish it?
So CISA right now, in concert with state and local election officials, with some of the equipment vendors, the election equipment vendors, other federal agencies like the FBI and the intelligence community are already up and running. They've been in an enhanced posture now since early voting began. So in some cases, weeks. Tomorrow, actually starting tonight, they will be in a physical location in an operations center in Washington, D.C., or at least in the area, and they'll all be sitting together sharing information. In the meantime, there's an online platform where everyone, these thousands of election officials that David talked about, are all collaborating online, sharing information on threats they see. So we've been talking a lot about disinformation, but we're also concerned about cybersecurity attacks, things like defacements or denial of service attacks against election night reporting websites or other unofficial websites. But the key, as David alluded to, is the resilience of the system.
Yeah.
That 97 to 98% of votes that will be cast on paper, have a paper record associated with.
And the voting machines themselves are not attached to the internet. They're local networks.
That is right. They're not connected to the internet. There are multiple layers of security controls around these systems where voters or the general public, even the bad guys, don't have unfettered access to these systems to manipulate. And they're testing before. They're testing during the election, and they're testing after the election to ensure the performance and accuracy of these systems.
And people should also know, we might not know immediately on Tuesday night. A candidate cannot call the election.
Right.
The election has to be called on an official basis. We should emphasize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, the media doesn't even really call the election. What we're
exactly
telling
right.
people is we have seen enough votes that we can now call it, but it's going to take some time. Everyone should be ready for it. It's a
Yeah.
complex issue.
Yeah. So
We
be
project
patient,
it.
is what
Yeah,
you're saying.
exactly.
Wait for consensus.
All right, David Becker, Chris Krebs, appreciate you.
All right.